Welcome to another episode of the Sober-Minded Show, and in this episode I'll be discussing a topic that I've brought up many times in the past on previous podcast episodes, and especially in the last one I was kind of talking about it a lot, which is the topic of converged interests, or groups having converged interests, groups forming over a common goal. And so in particular in the last episode I was talking about the Elon Musk controversy about immigration and the H-1B visas, some of the pushback that he was getting on Twitter within the conservative voter base. One of the things I brought up was increasing immigration or decreasing immigration is not really going to change anything or solve any of the issues that America is facing currently, because there are groups that are tampering with these different spheres or different realms within America, and these groups are built around converged interests or having the same goal. It is something I do talk a lot about, and I haven't really taken the time to explain it. So for this episode, that's what I'll be doing, explaining converged interests, what I mean by that. And first, I'll be going into the generalities of converged interest groups, and then I'll be getting into the specifics of what groups exist, or at least the groups that we know about, and which corporations or companies are involved in these converged interest groups. And the whiteboard is making a return appearance here to help me explain this concept to you. So the first step we have to take in understanding what converged interests are is you have to understand the way that people operate. And of course, looking at this from a Christian perspective, which is the right perspective, we have to consider the anthropology of Christianity, which is that man is fallen. Man is naturally in a fallen state, and so because of that, man has a natural inclination to evil rather than good. And so taking that into account, some of these things will make a lot more sense moving forward. When considering large groups of people, and even on the smaller scale, we see these things are also true. Let's say you have a group of 1,000 people, and so this square that's shaded in represents 1,000 people. Now, let's say this group, the goal of this group, or at least on the face of it, the goal of this group is to, let's say, clean up the city. So this square represents 1,000 people that want to clean up the city. They go out into whatever city and they clean up the streets, and that's their main goal. And then this group will not disband until they fulfill that goal, until they accomplish that. But obviously this particular group, when looking at the real world, any group like this does not operate within a vacuum, or they're not operating alone. Of course, there are other groups that they work together with, or maybe other groups that are in competition with it. But regardless, this group is not acting alone. Let's say there are other groups of 1,000 people that have either contrasting goals or similar goals. Let's say we have another group that has a contrasting goal, another group that has a similar goal. This might sound kind of silly, but let's say the contrasting goal of this other group would be to make the city dirtier. Maybe that's a side effect of their main goal. And then the similar group, maybe they have the exact same goal, or maybe they want to clean up one section of the city, and so in that way they coincide with the middle group here. Now imagine this on a much larger scale, where we have thousands of groups of 1,000 people, both with similar goals and contrasting goals, and within the same city. And there's going to be groups made with people within these groups, so groups within groups. And then even further, there's going to be groups of people within these separate groups themselves. So let's say this group is split in half. One side has one method of cleaning up the city, the other half has a different method of cleaning up the city. And each of these half groups would have one person as the figurehead of each group, one person being sort of a spokesperson for each half of the group, being a spokesperson for each method of cleaning up the city. The more that this kind of activity continues, there's going to be a separation within the group, because they're going to be at odds with each other. Eventually their methods aren't going to be able to coincide with each other, and there's going to be stress within the group, and there might be a fracture within the group later on. Inevitably, that is what happens. And so there would be two groups of 500 people, and realistically, most of the time, groups do not split evenly like that. Now, let's say it turns out the reason they split was there was an infiltrator from the contrasting groups were tampering with the people within this group in order to cause division. Now, this is a pretty basic setup, kinds of things that can happen with these kinds of groups of people, and this is sort of a natural occurrence when you have large groups of people who are fallible and people who are always changing. And these divisions also occur within the contrasting group and within the groups that are similar, again, because of the same reasons. And the relationships become even more complicated when you consider You have people from the similar groups that are actually a part of the contrasting groups, and then vice versa. Contrasting groups, they have people within the similar groups. Now, the way this operates in the real world, or we see glimpses of this, is we see people who are a part of one group sort of acting against the group that they're a part of. And it's most likely because they are getting money or they are being forced for some reason or another by a contrasting group to accomplish those things. Now, when you consider something like the government, we have a large group with several groups. You have one massive group, which is made up of many other groups within it as well, filled with many people. And so when considering that and the complexity that we saw in the previous example, we see the same complexities on a much larger scale, and especially when these people are coming up with solutions that are supposedly to help the people of America, it becomes a much larger issue. So in actuality, this would be the federal government, and then of course, state governments down to the town level. These hierarchy of governments that are supposed to be working in the interest of the American people. And of course, the people make their voice heard through things like voting, making their opinions known in the public square, which means online, through things like freedom of speech and freedom of the press. And the job of the news and media is supposed to be to make some of these things known of what they're doing, some of the differences that they're having, and the kind of impact that they're going to have on the people of America. So basically everything that we know that's going on within these regions, we hear it firsthand, or we hear it through the media. Now the problem that we've seen recently and of course in other countries, but this problem has been growing within the past years, is that the media is actually a part of these government groups. And what I mean by that is we have political parties that are paying the media large sums of money in order to portray stories a certain way, or people within these news agencies and media groups have converged interests with a certain political party, and so they advocate for that particular party over the other one, and they try to make the opposite party look bad. So the information that they're giving the American people is not a true and honest observation of what's going on within the government, whether that's on the federal level, state level, or the town level. Something else we have to consider is that there are corporations and companies that are also a part of this paradigm here, that are also part of the system here. And the same thing is, and they're getting money or giving money to these government agencies, thereby dividing these relationships even further, atomizing these groups even further. An example of this is you have people within Congress or the Senate who are investing in these corporations, so they have access to things like insider trading. Even further, something else that we have to consider is the military. And of course, this is something that we've been warned about by many intelligent people. For example, Eisenhower's famous speech.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
All while the people at the very bottom, people who are being used by these groups in the upper region here, people of America, are the ones suffering and feeling the effect of the positives and negatives that are going on up here. So basically you have no control of what's going on up here, but they have control over you. Something else to consider is also the medical, or what's called Big Pharma. It's another group of converged interest with different people from different groups here. We have the medical corporations. We also have the military being involved, and of course people from our federal government. Something that we've seen recently is, of course, what we've seen with the COVID. I'm not sure if I can say that word, but with the recent pandemic with the C virus, that's when we saw, interestingly enough, we actually saw these groups come together and work together because they had a converged interest, supposedly, of protecting the American people. And because they had that converged interest, they all wanted a piece of the pie in controlling and suppressing the American people. That's exactly what we saw during those years of the pandemic. Everybody wanted to have their piece of control Some people were not willing to give up that control, and we saw in some states some of the rules and stipulations lingered on depending on who was in charge of what state and who was in charge of what town. And there we see the effect of these groups of converged interests. They could have lifted these stipulations from the American people, but some groups chose not to. Some groups did. For example, we saw parts of Texas and especially Florida. Not only that, but we also saw people who were basically absolved from those regulations. We saw them defying the regulations of social distancing and mask wearing. Something major did happen because of that, and because the American people were seeing this. Some people were seeing this for the first time, but we were seeing through the cracks of these groups of converged interests. It wasn't really about what was better for the people, but what we were seeing was that the things that these groups were telling the American people to do, they weren't doing it themselves. And here we come to the idea that there's something going on behind the curtains. There's something going on behind the closed doors of the federal government. And then on a much larger scale, of course, every nation is having these kinds of realizations as well, whether it's China or Russia. Their governments are also hiding something behind the curtains. Deals being made or hands being shaken behind closed doors among these nations and among these countries. Now we get into the realm of globalism, which is the ultimate group of converged interests. And so now we'll get into the specifics of the converged interests on a global scale. In simple terms, globalism is the idea that the entire world should be on the same page. We have groups and figures like the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, George Soros, United Nations, NATO in there as well. All these groups and all these people advocate for the principle that everyone in the world should be on the same page. The way they do that is obviously different based on the person, based on the group. And these groups and figures have basically spread their tentacles out as far as they can, having their hand in many places throughout the world, sending out rules and regulations for other groups of converged interests to follow, affecting the common people throughout all the world. So this shouldn't take that long to get through. I think you'll see the main point pretty early on here. I have a couple web pages open of some of the different globalist organizations that I mentioned, important figures among the globalist movement, looking at their about pages to see what exactly, in their words, what their goal is and what they're doing in the world. And it's not going to take long to find out what exactly that they want to do. And all these different organizations and people are working together to some degree. They're friends or they donate to each other's companies. They're all involved together in one way or another. Bill Gates, on his website called Gates Notes, he says, "I believe that people who are financially successful have a responsibility to give back to society." But here now we see his emphasis on global health. So he writes, or whoever wrote this for him, "Foundation works on problems that aren't getting addressed by markets, diseases, and health conditions that disproportionately affect the world's poorest people. I was inspired to get involved in global health in the 1990s when I learned that every year around 10 million children were dying. I was shocked and horrified. Most of them I found out were in poor countries and died of preventable causes that I never had to worry about in my own family. Ultimately, reducing childhood mortality in low-income countries became the top goal of my giving. Today, the number has dropped from 10 million children a year to about 4.5 million. Still an appalling number, but a mark of real progress and reason to believe that we can eliminate preventable child deaths together." And of course, what he's talking about here, low-income nations, low-income families. From the poorest countries in the world, mainly he's talking about Africa. And so, you know, the classic picture of help the poor children in Africa and that kind of thing. Think about what you know about Bill Gates and what he advocates for. He advocates for population control. He advocates for abortion. He, of course, is a big proponent of climate change and that the world is overpopulated, that there's too many people in the world. So when you consider all those things, you start to get an idea of what exactly he means by global health. And again, here we have COVID-19 pandemic underscored the importance of preparedness and rapid response to global health threats. During the pandemic, the foundation helped broker deals between pharmaceutical companies and vaccine manufacturing companies that led to billions of safe, effective doses being made and delivered. Well, we know that was pretty much a lie. In my book, How to Prevent the Next Pandemic, I propose some strategies to prevent future pandemics, emphasizing the need for global cooperation, investment in healthcare infrastructure, and rapid vaccine development. And I mean, if you read between the lines, you can see what exactly is going on here. Global cooperation. That's the globalist agenda again, that the entire world has to be on the same page. Investment in healthcare infrastructure, well, they're already investing in it. So whenever a pandemic comes out and the manufacturing is increased from the healthcare sector and the production is also increased, whoever's investing is going to get a lot of money out of that. And then his work done in the United States, or his philanthropist work in the United States. Foundation's work in the U.S. is focused on improving K through 12 education and economic mobility. And of course, he's going to have a liberal agenda when it comes to education. So ultimately, anything that he does to help out in the education sector is also going to be a net negative. And furthermore, Bill Gates owns 275,000 acres of U.S. farmland. And of course, he says it's for philanthropic reasons or humanitarian reasons. For example, he wants to give people more jobs. So now we'll look at BlackRock, which is a large group, and they say they're a fiduciary institution. So they're an asset manager, one of the world's leading providers of investment, advisory, and risk management solutions. We're a fiduciary to our clients, and by investing on their behalf, we help millions of hardworking Americans experience financial well-being. So basically, you give them money, they use your money to make more money for you and themselves in the long run. Also, a very, very odd picture here. I'm not going to get into that side of it, but I'm sure there are some conspiracy theories out there that will make something from that. Why BlackRock? More and more investors put their trust in BlackRock in large part because we offer more choice. Global platform, there it is again, global platform designed to help our clients become better positioned to meet the financial goals that matter most to them. This is important right here. BlackRock generated 1.8 trillion of net inflows over the last 5 years. We helped more than 35 million Americans invest to save for retirement, and more than 190,000 financial advisors in the U.S. choose BlackRock to help build client portfolios. BlackRock worldwide. Once again, we see these words, global, worldwide. Now here's a chart of the equity holdings of BlackRock. So these are some of the companies that BlackRock invests in using the money of their clients. So here, for example, the biggest holding they have is in Apple, and the value of the holdings is 170.7 billion, and with Microsoft, 155.0 billion. So that's how much they hold. Well, within these companies, 20 billion, 27.9 billion in Visa, Meta as well, 32.4 billion. And as a part of these holdings, to a certain degree, they also get a say in what's happening in these companies. So, for example, if you hold a certain amount in a company, you are invited to the shareholders meetings, and depending on how much you have, depends on how much sway you have in the corporation or in the company. And so that's what BlackRock has done. And if you've heard of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, we know that they are enforcing those rules and regulations upon the companies that they hold these large holdings in. And all these companies are very much happy to go along with this sort of DEI thing, and they have been for the past 10 years. And it's not until recently that we really started to see that sort of being chipped away from these businesses. They're starting to stray away from the DEI model because it's not as lucrative as it was previously. I think a lot of people are starting to wake up to that facade. But once again, here you can see Apple and Microsoft, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Google, Meta, Mark Zuckerberg, all these different companies, all these figureheads from these different companies, Tesla, Elon Musk again, and all these people are pretty much in cahoots. So that's another reason why I'm kind of skeptical of Elon Musk, but we'll see what happens in the future. Now moving on to the next one, NATO, and here this is their About Us page. They say their aim is for political and military alliance. Politico, NATO promotes democratic values and enables members to consult and cooperate on defense and security-related issues to solve problems, build trust, and in the long run prevents conflict. And for the military, NATO is committed to the peaceful resolution of disputes if diplomatic efforts fail. It has the military power to undertake crisis management operations. These are carried out under the Collective Defense Clause of NATO's founding treaty, Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, or under a United Nations mandate, alone or in cooperation with other countries and international organizations. Again, international organizations, other countries, that globalist mentality. Here's the hierarchy of NATO. You have the countries who are involved, and then you have the military and the delegates from NATO, from within these countries. And the reason why this is such a dangerous thing is that all these realms or spheres located down here are subservient to this group up here. And going back to the idea of converged interests, as soon as this group of the member countries are influenced in a certain direction, all the other pieces fall in line. And at the end of the day, who suffers? Well, it's the people who are at the bottom rung, are the common people of these countries that are the ones that suffer. And if you want to do more research, you can look at some of the disasters from NATO, very similar to the UN. The next person here that we'll be looking at, and the name of his foundation, supposedly for philanthropy, is titled Open Society. And once again, we see that globalist, worldwide kind of language, an open society where anything goes and everyone's included. But the most important part here is the beginning of his philanthropy in 1979, giving scholarships to black South Africans under apartheid. And again, Africa again being used as sort of one of these places where people can show that they are philanthropic. They can virtue signal about how philanthropic they are. And even further down, helped kickstart America's medical marijuana movement. And in the early 2000s, he became a vocal backer of same-sex marriage efforts. So that tells you really about what kind of open society that he wants. 1979, starting to build a more open world. So all of this is just a cover. It's just a front to cover what's really going on behind the scenes. And the same goes for all these groups. Again, United Nations. This is their About Us page. One place where the world's nations can gather together, discuss common problems, and find shared solutions. So once again, the world's nations, same kind of language. And recently from the United Nations, they released this document on the 22nd of September 2024. This is sort of an update of an article that they've had previously, I believe. And this is sort of outlining their pact, what they call the Pact for the Future. And so you can read a lot of this, and it's very interesting, the kind of language they use. In the first couple of statements here, we, the heads of state and government representing the peoples of the world, have gathered at United Nations headquarters to protect the needs and interests of present and future generations through the actions in this Pact for the Future. Well, who decides what we need to be protected from, and who decides what our interests are? Well, our interests are the converged interests of these groups that want to be over us. But the second statement here reads, we are at a time of profound global transformation. We are confronted by rising catastrophic and existential risks, many caused by the choices we make. And by we, I wonder if they mean them. Fellow human beings are enduring terrible suffering. If we do not change course, we risk tipping into a future of persistent crisis and breakdown. Statement 3, yet this is also a moment of hope and opportunity. Global transformation is a chance for renewal and progress grounded in our common humanity. Advances in knowledge, science, technology, and innovation could deliver a breakthrough to a better and more sustainable future for all. The choice is ours. Yep, the choice is theirs to make, and we just have to follow in line. You can find this for yourself. It's not that hard to find, and read the rest of it for yourself to see the kind of crazy things that they want to enforce upon the world. And then finally, the World Economic Forum, which is pretty much the center of this globalist mentality. They say, our mission, the World Economic Forum, is the international organization for public and private cooperation. It provides a global, impartial, and not-for-profit platform for meaningful connection between stakeholders to establish trust and build initiatives for cooperation and progress. In a world marked by complex challenges, the World Economic Forum engages political, business, academic, civil society, and other leaders of society to shape global, regional, and industry agendas. Established in 1971, heart of our mission of improving the state of the world lies the belief in the power of human ingenuity, entrepreneurship, innovation, and cooperation. So another word you see pop up a lot through these different pages that we've been reading is diversity, and of course DEI. So this globalist idea to have everybody on the same page, all the nations on the same page, it is really tied to and coincides with this other idea that everyone's voices needs to be heard. Everyone's on the same equal playing field, men and women, by race, by status, by wealth. The entire playing field should be even, equal opportunity, equal outcome, which is also a communist idea.
When I mention our names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, is that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are for our actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
And that's true in Argentina too. Wow.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's true in Argentina as well.
It's true in Argentina, and it's true in France now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a vice-president with a young global leader, but what is important for me is those young global leaders have an opportunity to come here.
Right.
And we have established a course now since several years. And I think this cooperation has a tremendous impact, because being here for a week really creates a strong community. And we, in addition to the young global leaders, we have now the global shapers in 450 cities around the world.
And so the end goal of all of this is to enforce the entire world under a communistic dictatorial regime. I think that's the end game that they want. And of course, because they want what's best for us, so we should just sit down and listen and do as we're told. But of course, that is not the proper response. I think it's pretty clear that there is only one global force in the world, and that is the church, which will never be foiled. It's not united by man or man's pride or man's pursuit for global domination. Rather, it is united under the King of Kings and the ruler of all, which is Jesus Christ. Christians should not be subservient to this globalist agenda. Rather, we should submit ourselves under the church, under God's word, under Christ himself. And the church is diverse. There's no need to force diversity within the church. God has picked his own people to be diverse. Men and women of all different types of races. No need to force any of this diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think, in a sense, this whole globalist agenda is almost a negative reflection of the church. They want everyone to be on the same page, and they want everyone to follow one leader, one agenda. But it's satanic in nature, because it is more focused on man's ability and power to fix the world, to save the world. They are their own saviors, or so they think. And really, they're trying to push God out of the equation. Globalism is not a new idea. In fact, it's a very ancient idea. Go back to the Garden of Eden. What did Satan tell Eve? Satan said, did God really say to not eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil? And basically, Satan was telling the entire world, which was Adam and Eve at the time, Satan was telling them that he knew what was best for them, which was to eat of the tree and to become like God. Now, fast forward throughout all the years where people have tried to build a tower towards God, right? So in the Tower of Babel, there was sort of this globalization that was happening. What did God do with it? He confused them all, confused their languages, and caused them to separate. They had a converged interest of reaching towards God by building this giant tower. And so God foiled their plan to do that. Then even more after that, we see the kingdoms that rise and fell, and the kingdoms that literally wanted to control the entire world, at least the known world at the time. And you have people like Genghis Khan, for example, Alexander the Great, so on and so forth. They wanted total domination We don't think there are kings anymore, but seems like there are people who have great influence, almost as if they were a king. There are people pulling the strings of basically the entire world around us, and we don't notice it because we're being fed things to occupy our minds and occupy our attention, while these people that are over us are doing basically whatever they want with us. And that's everything I wanted to say in this topic, so I'll see you in the next one.